live in Anakin. I grew up in Livingston County, a little bitty, nothing town, 1.5 streets if you don't count the tractor road. South Line, if anybody's heard of it, but it's a real town. So I try to come here once a year to do this because everybody's always interested in the Linden Murders. I think I'd like to start with Candles in the Rain. And I'll try to cover them all. I'm here until 4. I'll take any questions. I'm here until my wife picks me up, which could be. But she usually just unloads me up front with my stuff. Let me start here. In 1997, about 4 or 5 miles as the crow flies towards Alexander, there was a body of a woman found in a creek. This was Rippel. That's Ann. So this way. I think she was 41 at the time. That's Ann. And that's a creek where she was found. It's a little town of Wanda Creek. What? Pass it back there. To make a short story really long, Ann's sister, Janet, got a hold of me. She got a hold of me through my wife's sister, Chrissy. They worked together. I said, would you mind if could we ask Rob to take an independent look at the case file? Because they were familiar with Linden Murders.
Did you see that?
So naturally, I can't say no unless I'm told to say no. And they came over, and I looked at the case file with the materials. I didn't want to know their opinion on who did it because I didn't want to be biased one way or the other. So what I did, what I need to do is find the right folder. So the first thing I did is I wanted to see the current newspaper story that came out about Ann. There's a couple. That came out the following day. And I read just this little blurb, all the highlighted sections. And to give you a little background on me, I have about 10 to 12 years in mental health counseling. Memphis, Tennessee, big city. I worked with the homeless, mentally ill, so I had to be able to diagnose without approaching anybody. And that's led to some profiling work over the years. This was one that I did first time in a long time. So I looked at the key words on here. You won't see newspaper stories like this much anymore. The sheriff said at the time that it was definitely a homicide because condition of the scene. Items were left along a gravel path that led to the farm and the creek behind. She was wearing only a sweater and socks. Underwear was discarded across the gravel road. Now, that told me that it was a disorganized crime scene. There's two different crime scenes, an organized one and a disorganized one. To give you an idea of what an organized one, think of Ted Bundy. Always clean, meticulous, well-groomed. You know, he managed the situation. He manipulated the girls. But he was a sexual psychopath. He was a nut, you know, and that his behavior, he did hide the bodies. There's a photo here. This is a photo. I only have one, so that's an idea of what a disorganized individual would be like. So I'm looking at the definition of a disorganized individual. Okay, sloppy. Doesn't change his socks for a while. I said, okay, Kendra, I've hit the first 5 on this list. But that's an idea of what a disorganized individual can be like. And that's how I looked at the crime scene. Okay, if they're a disorganized criminal, they're going to live a disorganized lifestyle. One of the profilers I approached was Kim Rosselmer, Canadian criminologist. He said, Ron, look at it this way. A disorganized individual tends to commit a crime within 1.7 miles of the crime scene. So what do you think I did? Got my dog, got in the car, went down to the crime scene, which is about halfway up that creek, generally where that picture was taken from. And I did a drive of 1.7 miles. Got in the driveway, turned around and went back home. So mark the address. And the bridge will show you. Yeah, picture of the bridge. It shows what direction traffic flows. Traffic flows west to east on that's Creek Road. Okay. So Wasserman taught me how to do the geographic profiling. So, okay, he's disorganized. He thinks he's a local individual based on 1.7 miles. So I looked at the county demographics. What's the demographics for Alexander, for that local area? Predominantly white, Slavic, Serbian. I took those two, matched it with the psychopathic, not psychopathic, but disorganized lifestyle, low education, small in stature, machismo, I always want to be like this. So I built a profile based on that individual. Back up a little bit. After a meeting with Janet, I went down and met with Jerry Brewster, who was head of the cold case section down at the Genesee County Sheriff's Department. He says, okay, you can go this way, you can go this way, but don't go that way. Okay? There's only so much I can tell you, but send me anything you got and any information. So I built a complete 55 different part profile on what I think this individual was. Turned it over to Jerry. At the same time, we built a real active social media. I was anonymous. I didn't put my name on it for a long time. Janet ran it. I mean, really active. She did a lot of news, a lot of newspaper stories, was even on Dateline NBC in 2019, so we got that far. And we had like 1,300 people on our Facebook page. All of them generally positive, but one was extremely nasty. One was really bitter on everything we posted. I said, well, that's interesting. So I took the ISP and the Facebook link and I sent it to the sheriff. I said, this is the guy, and I even snarfed the picture off his Facebook page. I said, this is the guy that's giving us all the nasty stuff. I showed Janet, and she said, I worked with that guy, he knew my sister. What gave him away was a large tattoo on the back of his head, picture of an eye. Stood up this tall, always carried a knife. Quit school in like 9th grade, so he's starting to fit the profile well now. When I was told that this gentleman lived at a certain address on Creek Road, it was at the 1.7 mile mark, it was the driveway I turned around in. So I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. So we know where he is. He's in New Mexico. Last thing I knew, they were doing a familial DNA because there's trace DNA in the scene. So that's where we left off with Rippel. We know who did it. If you look, that's the only copy of the book remaining. But I got studying the scene. You got little town Wanda Creek. There's a dirt road that runs adjacent to it. You got Creek Road running west and east, and you got Brookline in the other direction. I said, okay, let's say it was an accident that Ann was in the water. Can't deny that someone was with her because the clothes was off. She wouldn't have done what she did. Duct tape was around her mouth, so she wouldn't have duct taped herself. So I said that they were waiting for her. There was only one place they could watch all three roads at the same time. The dirt road, Creek Road, and Brookline. That's from that railroad bridge that's just over Creek Road. I thought they were up alongside that. That's the way they could pay attention to all three. If you go back to the handout, it says the body was discovered by a woman who had her son with her. I go down there and I watch the traffic flow. no speed limit really. Says, okay, how fast does a car have to be going in order to spot the body at a certain time of year in that creek? It's, I think September. Is it September? No, April, I'm sorry. Foliage-wise, late April is kind of similar to maybe early September, you know. So I did a car clock, and I said, okay, between 25 and 30 miles an hour, a car would have to be going, traveling to see something over the creek, because I set my wife out there standing like this. I said, well, it couldn't have been from the opposite side of the road, because the driver probably wouldn't be paying attention. That's going west towards Batavia. Had to be going east. And who would have spotted it? I think it was her son in the back seat. Mother would have been driving. She would have had to go like this to see anything. Kid would have been just looking up the window. So I followed the theory that it was her son that actually discovered the body. Right or wrong, it just seems to make sense to me. Any questions on that? Any comments? Want to throw anything at me? Okay. But there is only one copy, and I need to tell you that all my books except 2 will be going out of print at the end of the year. We had to set aside writing and move on to other things in life. Linden Murders. Anybody here to hear about the Linden Murders? No. Okay. Anybody know about the Linden Murders? Okay. You guys from around here? Or you're around here?
I read Bill Brown's book.
Oh, Bill Brown, sure.
Yeah.
Me too.
Bill was, we actually had a chance to meet years ago at a Rotary meeting. And the guy in charge of Rotary said, you guys need to sit down and talk. Bill wrote a little book like this. And it was really my wife who got me interested in it. Like I said, we live in Attica. And it's, you go all around corners and like this, probably 4 or 5 miles from Linden. And she said, you need to look into the Linden Murders stuff. I said, what do you mean stuff? Okay. Linden Murders is probably about the size of this Linden is about the size of this museum, probably real tiny. So I did a cold case. I looked at the cold cases in Genesee County, and the Linden Murders came up. And I said, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Four murders in Linden for a time frame of 3 years. Nobody caught the guy. And well, okay, they give me something to do for the summer. I'll go look at this. So I went down to county historian, just down the other end of town. They still have the case material. Boxes and boxes of interviews, of photographs. So I probably spent 4 or 5 months down here, just going over everything, analyzing it, throwing out the rumors and the garbage, and talks where Linden was cursed by the Indians. That every couple of years, someone rode the rails, came out, murdered somebody, got back on the train. That stuff is a story. So I had to set that aside. I looked at all the material, drew a line of suspects, and eventually it came down to 2 for me. And one of the things I had to look for first was what motives could there have been. Let's take a look at that. And that's part 2 too. It's not stable because my wife ran out of staples. She did? I can say that because she's not here. At least she slowed down when she went handed to her. I mean, it's red light. Can you get up? Just look at the first entry.
Sure.
You can share? Okay. Costs $1 to share.
Okay.
Did I give you one for pass it down? Animal cruelty. The guy that hit a cow so hard it's knocked its eyes out. Just obliterated the animal. Said, okay, let's keep that up here. This is motive point number 2. That was from the Linden store, the little country store they have there. And it was a demand for payment from the suspect. In 1924, he ran up over about $150 in credit. His mother, as it turned out, was paying bills for him, but his mother had passed away. Now, so both these connect to the same individual. If you go to the animal cruelty charge, it was filed by Francis Kimball, the victim of 1921. The credit due payment was from the Morris store, and Mabel Morris was the co-owner of the store who issued the payment on demand. So she was killed in 1924, March of that year, along with Tom and Hattie Whaley in this house. If you're familiar with Linden, it's a real bitty little town that really sits on a railroad. You have the general store, which is right here.
Where is it?
Linden, Lexington. She gives me a compass and not a watch because I don't know directions. If someone knows better directions than I, if you go down 63, which is Ellicott, hang a walk right on Bethany, you'll see the old rolling hills that's on a lot of ghost shows and stuff. At that stop sign, you'll see Linden Road. And a 5-minute drive, you're out of there. So it's real time. Across from that store, it's still there. It's called the Linden Mill. It's a big red building. You'll be able to spot it. Mabel co-owned that store and took care of the books, so she sent the demand for payment. Night of March 23rd, 1924, she had a habit. About 6 o'clock, going and getting milk from the windows. The suspect lived in a house just the other side of the railroad tracks. So my theory was that he waited till the 6:15 train, crossed the pathway as the train was coming past the Linden Mill, snuck into the back of this house and waited. Now, will somebody, or no one will skip it up, about the suspect. When he was a boy, he'd fallen beneath a train. He lost 3 fingers on his right hand. He's in this picture. The gentleman towards the back was the 1924 victim, Tom Whaley. They worked together. Suspect always wore gloves. In this murder house, they found a bunch of .32 caliber shells. So when I interviewed the suspect in the sheriff's department, he says, I cannot fire a .32 pistol. Smart investigator later said, whatever happened to that rifle that your brother had? Said, I haven't used this since last December. You get to use a rifle, but he couldn't use a pistol. He couldn't fire, but he could go like this. I think it was a .32 caliber rifle. So I talked to the sheriff, the same poor sheriff down there. I said, is this possible? He said, it's very possible that he used a rifle instead of a pistol. Both these people were shot. Mabel Morris, the co-owner of the store, was clubbed, and I think it came from the stock of the rifle. I have some pictures here, if you don't mind seeing some rather gruesome pictures. I don't know how to put it. I'll send these around. I'll start with Francis Kimball. This one from 1922. I'm going to go this way. You see Francis under the fruit bin in her house. That was September of 1921. Excuse me if my dates were wrong. My theory, when I went back and I did what's called a null hypothesis, I went back to prove that this guy didn't do it. I couldn't do it. So my theory was he's going to come back the night he killed her and set fire to the house because he put wood all around her, her two brothers were gone, so the house was empty. I say that because this is from 1924. It's the crime scene. There's 3 bodies in that picture. What he did, he pulled the shades down in the house, locked all the doors, plugged all the holes. Then he set fire to the room. He wrapped the bodies in carpet, poured them with kerosene, but it wouldn't ignite. So he tried again and again and again. So there's 3 bodies in that picture. This came up in some of the information I was looking through. The police came to the suspect right away. A couple of the items that were missing from the lady's house was some loose change and a hand. So they go talk to the suspect and said, what have you been doing tonight? Sitting here eating a ham sandwich. I said, wow, this guy was bold. You know? And he was within 100 yards of the back door of the house. He had the motive, he had the opportunity, and he had the means. And it only pointed to one guy. The kills and the other names involved. They may have had 1 or 2 or 3 elements, but they didn't have all 3. So what I did in this first book here is I actually tell the readers who did it. I break it down by, this was the evidence I saw. This was the photographs. It can only be this one guy who points them out. I name him at the end of the book. Now part 2 is called Twisted Tree. There's enough material, like I said, to do 3. There's not going to be a third one, not by me anyway. Twisted Tree deals with a 1917 murder of a woman off Route 63, just outside the village. I'll show you some gross pictures again. Some of her items are here in the museum. She's only identified as Ruth. Blunt force trauma to the face, probably a knife. That's what the Turner nursing home, the funeral home still in town, that was a reconstruction of it. You go to the front room on your way into the museum, you're going to see a lock of Ruth's hair, her little coin purse, and a number of items from Frances Kimball's home here. The dress she was wearing at the time, the phone cords were cut. There's a pistol there. It's from that era, but I believe it wasn't any part of the crime. The second suspect that was considered had hidden, I believe, that pistol under the outhouse. I couldn't match up A with B. Ruth was from 1917. Said, I live in Attica in 1935. A farmer was, this is Tom Whaley. This gentleman here. All autopsies were done either in a house. Since there was no house, they likely did it in Attica. You could also buy your couch, your coffin, and autopsy don't always include. Now, 1935, the suspect had moved to Attica. He'd been there for 7 or 8 years. And he lived on West Ave, right near the railroad tracks. And in May of 1935, gentleman farmer Benjamin Phillips, he had one arm, was found murdered. That's his bedroom. Suspect had pulled all the blinds down, blocked all the holes, wrapped Mr. Phillips in clothes and poured kerosene on him. I said, okay. MO was matching up. This is Mr. Phillips in the discovery. So I knew I had the guy linked to at least 5 murders. It was, the argument was seen the day before between Mr. Phillips and the suspect from Linden. They clearly identified the suspect from Linden. I said, okay, we got a suspect who matches all 3 points, what I call the psychopathic triangle, sociopathic triangle, arson, you go back to the first charge of animal cruelty. I couldn't match up the wedding at a bet. Who's going to know that, you know? But he certainly fit the description of a disorganized sociopath. In this book, too, I do a handwriting comparison. That's this. I actually have these tables together for you. Towards, as the 1935 investigation was going on, you mind passing these back? The sheriff received an anonymous letter. So what I did was I wanted to see if that came from a relative. So on the back is the marriage license of the suspect and his wife in 1917. And I compared the handwriting from the wife to the anonymous letter 18 years later, and I said, wow, very similar. I could understand why the woman, the person wrote that letter. I can't tell you because I killed her. So I do the handwriting comparison, and I believe high degree of probability that was his wife. I go back to Ruth, the woman in the field. There was a small little blurb in a newspaper in 1917 saying that the suspect is to be married to a woman from Michigan. That was all I heard of that case. There's no mention what the bride and the groom did, where they settled. No further mention of the bride. So I believe Ruth was this man's first wife. He worked only maybe a mile and a half from the scene. If you look at the picture of the face, very similar to blunt force trauma and blitz attack. So how long have you been doing this? You know? So I have him tied to at least 6. And it's called Twisted Tree because it's family tree. He had 2 brothers, and I want to say 2 sisters. And I'm probably going to be wrong, it's been 8 years since I did one. One sister committed suicide by walking into Coyote Lake. She drowned herself. One brother was a constable in Attica. Later was killed by a railroad in Buffalo on Christmas Day, I think in 1930. So that left his sister and his wife and another brother who kind of really left the area. I think his name was William. 2 people in his life that were very influential was his mother. 3 was his mother, his wife, and his sister Julia. I'm going to give you a very poor rendering of the crime scene. I did that all by myself. Just pass these around. There are some maps out there, but I honestly I don't know. A couple of these up there. You see the little house on the railroad tracks named Pattis. That was his mother's maiden name, and that's where Julia, who was single, remained. Julia had left for Michigan. The suspect moved into that house, crossed the railroad tracks, and that's the back of the Whaley house right there. So he's within just less than 100 yards. He held a grudge against the Kimballs, the Whaleys, the Morrises, Phillips. So he had a long trail. Vengeful thinking, vengeful behavior. A few years ago, we get this knock on the door. And this kind of irritated me a little bit. They were distant relatives of the suspect. Knocked on the door like 8 in the morning. My wife goes, "Come here, this is your doing." And they said, "Well, you know the book, we're a distant relative of him. Can you show us his grave?" I said, "Yeah, okay." I told Kendra, when we get up to the cemetery, you're driving, put your foot on the brake, keep it and go, keep it and drive. Okay, because if something happens, you can get out of there. But it was harmless. They just want to know the story about the what I knew about him. The grave is in Attica. He's buried in Attica. And every time we go up there, there's fresh flowers.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why my wife won't go there. He says, "You're going to go up there with those guys." I'm like, he died in Rochester Psych in 1962. I reviewed the commitment papers. I did have access to some of the material. He's no longer capable of maintaining himself. Small condemned little property up on the hill in Attica. Now, if you go back to the marriage license on the second sheet of the handwriting comparison, you'll see the name of the priest who married them. Let me see if I can see it. Colligan, or J.W. Colligan, is a Catholic priest who married. This is an interesting little story. Supposedly, when the suspect and his wife moved to Attica, he went to the Catholic Church and confessed everything he'd done. The priest said, "You need to go turn yourself in, because that's what you need to do." And at that point, the suspect left the Catholic Church. It just so happens that the priest in Attica at the time was the one who married him. He was Attica's priest at the time. I heard this guy's confession. Needless to say, he left the Catholic Church. That's pretty much what I had on the suspect. I covered a lot of material. Any questions on the Linden Murders? Just go ahead.
Just the very first murder you described, the woman in the creek. Was there any significance to, you said the woman that found the body, it was probably her son in the backseat. Is there any significance to her son seeing it versus her?
No, it just helped me identify what the moment might have been like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, to identify the speed, the traffic, how much traffic flow was there. It was a high traffic. You see, it was the noon hour. There were more than just one car then across the bridge at the time that she had been killed or fell into the creek and the time that she was discovered. So I wanted to explore, was there any more witnesses out there that nobody knows about?
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a question, I don't know if you can answer it or not. I was working for the health department at the time, and I had to go to this house, either for sewage or water. And she told, whoever was the realtor, told me about what had happened in the house, and the bloodstains were still there.
Yeah.
She said, "Would you like to go look at them?" I said, "I'll pass."
Yeah.
And then I just take it, I never heard of the Linden Murders up until that point. And then I read the book, and I know what the store is and who they suspected, Keller and all this stuff. But the lady Kimball, who lived on the other side of the tracks,
Right.
the house back there, and they found her dead. There was two sons. They farmed out. They
were apple pickers and stuff like that.
But it said she was originally from Madison County. Madison County is my home county.
Okay.
And I knew Kimball's. I knew the ones in Erskine Falls and the ones in Hamilton. They were friends of mine in my class, and I just wonder if there was any relation to these. It's kind of a common name.
Well, she's a matron. She never married, and her brothers, they had drinking problems. And I'm not trying to sell these, but in the book there's the second one. Here's a record of public intoxication and this and that, and she always blamed herself for selling hard cider. Always kept that going. That was prohibition time. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, Kimball, she did move into the area. I want to say about 1880, 1890. And you're right, it's kind of common, kind of uncommon. And then again, I went over the county demographics and the census from that time. Kimball's not uncommon. It wasn't common. So she had to come from somewhere. I found her father, but what's curious is there's also a postcard that I put in the second book from a small town in Michigan, which seemed kind of odd because they specifically drew to the Linden Murders. Now, it was either, I think I put it in this, it's been 8 years. So, the name of the Historical Society in that area is named the Kimball Historical Society. So it just seems kind of odd that there was a small town in Wisconsin or Michigan, excuse me, I can't get it for the state, but it was named after William Kimball. He had money, he settled to the area. Is there a correlation between the two? I don't know, but Frances certainly came from eastern part of the state.
Okay.
If you do an ancestry, someone's a dead end. There was reports that she had a son, and that he came back. Here's some of the rumors I looked at. That this adopted son came back in a fit of rage, murdered her for all the money she kept. Yeah, she was a spinster. She kept money orders from the general store. Never carried cash, never used banks. It was money orders. Can't prove where those money orders went. There was nothing taken from the house. Nothing was disturbed. She was killed in the basement. So it's just one of those, how do you prove it or disprove it? So she did supposedly have a son. I think her nephew lived in Attica. They married and settled in Attica, and he was a direct relation to our current fire chief. Yeah, so they're kind of interwoven that way. Any more questions? Linden, I can talk all day. Nothing? You don't want to know who did it? I mean, the big guy, he's scary looking. Okay, the Sullivan expedition. Everybody familiar with that a little bit? This goes back to my dad too. If I didn't give you one of these, this is kind of a cheat sheet that breaks down. Did I give you one of these?
Yes.
Kind of breaks down the Sullivan expedition. Now, growing up in South Lima, to the son of a historian, every year, say, yeah, this is the time of the torture tree at Collierville. I said, okay, Dad. Now I'm 7. It's time to learn about the Sullivan expedition. Okay, Dad, I'm 8. Following the year, I'm 9. The stories continue. So I knew that I wanted to do a book for Dad on the Sullivan expedition, so it was so important in his life. You familiar with Genesee Lake is? Okay. Think at the southernmost point of Genesee Lake. 1778, there was a series of attacks in eastern New York, Wyoming Valley, and Pennsylvania. It was Loyalists and Senecas. Their job, edged on by the British, was to destroy the settlements, the white settlements, drive them out of there in hopes of drawing the Continental troops down to protect the frontier. So Washington knew he had one thing he had to do in 1779, and that was to stop the Indian threat. So those are his words. I think he really wanted to starve the British out as well. So behold and blush, it goes from the very moment that Washington decided that a campaign was needed to stop the threat throughout the Finger Lakes and in northeastern Pennsylvania. I looked at some of those early writings in 1778. And I got to tell you the story. One of the little places is called German Flats. I think it's over Harper County, somewhere. They'll take me for that. There were 4 Continental Scouts. 3 were killed. 1 survived. And he took off on foot to warn all the little communities along the way that Joseph Brant was coming along with the Loyalists under the Butlers. So that 3-day run, he warned all the settlements, saved numerous lives. So in 1936, the book Drums Along the Mohawk was written. In 1939, the movie with Henry Fonda, that famous run where he left out of the fort to go warn all the communities about the pending doom, was based on this gentleman named Adam Helmer. And I put him in the book. I try to include little stories like that where someone might go, that's pretty cool. Last week we did a show. I was talking to a guy. He said, well, that's my last name, Helmer. I'm from Herkimer County. I said, well, need to look up a guy here, man, because I think he's the one. So I traced the formation of the Army, and there was going to be roughly 4,000 men under Sullivan, John Sullivan, and General Clinton. It's not that easy. Washington had considered Sullivan the biggest pain in the neck he could deal with. I include examples of that in the book. I don't think Sullivan was his first choice, maybe fourth. And all the other top generals ahead of him, Philip Schuyler, I think, was his preferred general. He said, I gotta go do this, and they all find excuses. Horatio Hale was probably going to be someone Washington could rely on, but there's something called the Conway Cabal, where it was seen as undermining Washington both in Congress, Continental Congress, and in his own military, his officers. And unfortunately, the blame for that landed on Horatio Hale. So ultimately, Washington was looking at what he had left, his Rolodex, and said, I got one guy, that's Sullivan. So Sullivan formed the army in eastern Pennsylvania. The northeast corner, south of Philadelphia, somewhere there, right on the New Jersey line. Their mission was to come up, traverse the Finger Lakes, Seneca Lake, Honeywell Lake, Hemlock. Their ultimate goal was the Indians' chief village, the Seneca village of Little Beardstown, which is roughly over by Genesee. Sullivan knew it was there, but he didn't know where. So the advance for Sullivan Army was under General Hand. General Hand had a group with him called the Pennsylvania Riflemen. And in that group were two riflemen, Lieutenant William Boyd and Michael Parker, a sergeant. They were out there scouting around, they knew stuff. So when they got to Hemlock Lake, it was a heavy rain. And Sullivan called Boyd to his tent, which had been closer to Hemlock than Canisius. He told Boyd, I want you to take 3 to 4 men and go scout the area of Little Beardstown. There was one witness to that. Adam Hugley, I believe is his name. Eventually went on to found the town of Olean. I always thought Sullivan was an opportunist. He wanted to witness to the instructions he gave Boyd. So if anything happened, well, the guy disobeyed orders. But I think what Sullivan did was outside the town, only with Boyd, he said, take a reasonable amount, take a group of men that he thinks reasonable in size. So he covered both his bases. One of the big parts of the book for me was the ambush just up on the Groveland Hills on Canisius Lake. We talked about South Lima. You know where J and A's is and Minnehan's and all. Is that Rochester Road?
It what?
Was that Rochester Road that they were on?
15.
50. Okay. Well, there was an Indian village called Canawagas over by Avon, the Four Corners. Joseph Brand, I want to say corn planter, and one of the chief warriors, Hayakatu. About 600 warriors were at that location. They knew where Sullivan was coming, so they left Avon, traveled down 15A up to Groveland Hills. And they waited in a ravine. And that night, Boyd and Parker expedition came up the hill, middle of the night. The Indians were just there watching them go on. They weren't going to do anything, because their plan was to assault the main body of Sullivan's army coming up the hill. So there would have been a major engagement that would have plot of land. On the way back, Boyd and Parker requested. Said, I think we're safe. The lake's only a couple miles that way, where the main army is. Then there was a sharpshooter with the same group, Timothy Murphy. He was notorious, known to be just very arrogant from what I read. He carried scalps with him. He shot an Indian and took his scalp. The Indians waiting in the ravine believed that was the main army coming up the hill. So they started to encircle, thinking that they were ready to do battle, but they simply encircled what turned out to be about 26 men on top of Groveland Hills. No Indians were killed, no loyalists were killed. I want to say 14 Americans were killed there in the Rippel Hills. 8 escaped, and 2, Boyd and Parker, were taken to Collierville over by Little Beardstown. What I found is, what is that, about 8 miles? Can you just like the Genesee that they both had 1 tendon each cut in their feet, so they couldn't run. When they got to Collierville, they were tied to that oak tree. So that covers what I used in there. There's a poem I have to say, I take credit for it, called The Witness. The one true witness to the crime was the tree. And once they got tied to the tree, there's always a story that Joseph Brandt came up, and he was a Freemason. Lieutenant Boyd offered him the sign of a brother Mason in distress. And Brandt had a history of letting fellow Masons go. He said, okay, you'll be safe. Brandt was called away, and the 2 guys were turned over to the Butlers, Walter and I think Warren. And they were some of the nastiest people in all of Revolutionary War. They butchered these guys. Boyd, they had cut him open, took out his intestine, plugged it on a tree, forced him to run around it. Both were eventually beheaded, castrated, fingers torn off, eyes plucked out. And they were found the following day. That's how they were left. So the Boyd and Parker massacre tree is really a big item for my dad. And he said, you need to focus on this. Go back to, I mentioned the name Hayek too. One of the warriors with Joseph Brandt. He was also the second husband of Mary Jennison. And this is her reburial over at Letchworth State Park about 1870. Are you familiar with Mary Jennison? Okay. And I got to thinking about who was the true witness to the torture tree. I found no material from the Seneca, nothing from the Loyalists, but I did find information in a biography she told in 1823. So was she the only true witness to the white witness to the torture? And she was. She just shared it in 1823. She was moved from the cemetery up by the Buffalo Creek Casino by William Wadsworth out to William Letchworth out to her spot there on Gardeau Flats. Am I saying that right? She owned that property. The Seneca gave her that property, and that's where she is now. Part of the book, I also try to figure out what happened to the 8 survivors. Some did return to the main army. I did try to learn what happened to these guys, where were they from, but some of the names were like an unknown Canadian. I'm not going to do that. At the end of the book, I bring up the name Elijah Kendrick. He's listed as dead, killed at the ambush spot. He's on the Patriot Stone of the Mount Hope Cemetery. But I'll leave it to you to decide if he's alive or dead. But any questions on that? I covered a lot of material. I try to write my history books like I like to read it. So, growing up and going to Livonia Public School was, some guy stood on the corner with a sign, he held a map and built a story. Okay, great. No. So I like to tell history the way I like to learn it. Yeah.
I did a paper on the Sullivan March here 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was always questioned that he waited until harvest time and he burnt all of their, because they were agrarian society, the Indians at that time. Then he burnt all of it, and they said, was that necessary, or did he need it? Was it just mean, or?
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do cover the topic of genocide. Because when I started this, a lot of second semester history students pointed their finger and said it was murder, pure and simple. Okay, it's not that simple. So I cover genocide based on facts and not emotion. What is the contemporary definition of the word? I take it from there and I give you my opinion. but I let the readers make up their mind. My opinion to that is Washington wanted to end the war in 1779. He said, the only way to do that, if we starve the Indians, guess who else we're starving? We're starving the British, because they were living off the land. Yeah, we're going to force them all to Fort Niagara. We're going to overwhelm the British at Fort Niagara to the point of capitulation. I think that was his plan. Force them all to Niagara and have British surrender in 1779. Was it mean and cruel? It all depends on what that is. You
It's a
know,
strategy, I guess.
it's a strategy, and it's been going on forever. You know, Washington wasn't new, he wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last. Neither was Red Jacket or any of those. Those raids down in German Flats in Wyoming Valley, Cherry Valley.
Yeah.
Their aim was to burn out the white settlements.
Mhm.
Starve them, kill them, run them away. It's no different than what they experienced. Good question, but it's in the book, so.
Some question, I know where the parking plaque is, but does the torture tree still exist?
Yeah, it's still there. That's a good question, too.
I think the last time I was there and reading it and I'm thinking, well, is this the tree they mean? Or,
No, it's there. I can show you a picture. Glad you brought that up because I got to thinking one day when I was on there. There it is. That's it there.
Okay, yeah, so
Yep,
it's,
it's still there. Still standing, so I got to thinking, I said, looking at the tree, I said, if it's that height now in 2023, what was its height in 1779? You know, I said, yeah, I said, what I said. Is that the tree? I'm not going to try to prove otherwise because you got all the tradition and the legend and everything that goes with it. But it's a head scratcher. You know, was the tree there now this high? Was it a scrap? You know, and I wanted to get a hold of a tree guy, and there's going to be somebody out there that can tell me how fast an oak grows. How tall would it be in 250 years? So there's a part in the conclusion of the book where there were ceremonies to move the bodies from that location, Boyd and Parker, up to Patriots Hill. And there's a couple of stories I include. The final chapter is called The Bear, The Cannon, and Who. And they reburied up there at Mount Hope, and actually stories come out the following day that they were just bear bones, bones of mother cub, or mother bear and a cub. I'll tell you this part. It eventually turned out to be a political battle between one party who moved them all up there and the one who never got credit for it. So this stuff never changes. And I'll share this one with you. My dad always told this story. You know, Rob, the Sullivan Army lost a cannon at the foot of Genesee Lake. He said, yeah, right there. Okay. That was going up and going through school and stuff. We heard that Sullivan's party lost the cannon at Genesee Lake. Okay, Dad, I'm going to prove something here to you. So I took the artillery inventory from the expedition. And I looked at it, okay, they had 6 big guns, 4 small ones, something what they call a grasshopper that was like a mortar. I know they left all big guns, I'm going to be out by number 2. That's Tioga Point, which was Fort Sullivan, their first real, like a supply depot. They would just move stuff up. They left the big guns there. They took a couple small ones up to Chemung and then Battle of Newton. They left a couple there, a couple at Honeoye. So by the time they got to Genesee Lake, I said, Dad, what do they got left? You know? I'll tell you the story because it's kind of cool. The legend started in 1876. Everybody was celebrating the 4th. And a group at the northern end of the lake or halfway up the lake said, do you hear that? The cannon roaring. It's got to be one of Sullivan's cannon, you know, the drunk story that started. And Sullivan lost his cannon in there. I said, okay. What it turned out to be was a blacksmith who's well under the state of mind and started pounding away at his anvil. So it echoed all the way up and down the lake. So, legend of the lost art cannon began at the anvil of a drunk blacksmith. That's in the books. Any more questions? I'll talk about anything. So I was picking me up in an hour and a half.
So is that oak tree, is that down in the flats in Genesee?
Yeah, County, right, is that 28? Running down there, 28,
That's why,
you'll miss the park if you're not looking for it, you'll miss it, because it's kind of sneaks up. Well, you pull in a little space and there's a stone in front of you, and you look off to the left and there's a tree, it's still there.
that's why the oak trees are so important in Genesee.
Yeah.
They don't want to take them down.
I go back there last spring, and I'm trying to figure out, was this a tree? So I'm looking up. And I said, how do I know, right? I started hearing some skirring in the grass behind me, so I don't need it. So I'll get out of here. But it's worth a thought. Tell you one of these stories. This is a book I did a long time ago called Swinging in the Rain. They might have a few. And when my wife gets impatient with me, she says, write something. I said, okay, I will. And this is all the capital cases in Genesee County. All the trials that led ultimately to an execution. A cellar where a hanging and the actual gibbet is still here. It's in the back room where they hung a couple of these guys. There's a story in there about, I added a little did you know type of stories. The first guy executed in an electric chair. He was killed up in Auburn. But he was a peddler by trade in Buffalo on the west side. Reportedly, one of his best customers always bought china pieces, and as he could always rely on them. The guy turned out to be the inventor of the electric chair. His best customer was the first man to be killed by the electric chair, and they're buried not too far apart in Buffalo Cemetery. Usually I'm better organized than this one. Gee, right here. Here's another story, 1887. It's called The Peddler's Gold. Yes. It's about a case of bones they found out in Bethany. Reportedly, a peddler who had a bunch of gold, he came on this and so did the gold. So you can keep any of this stuff if you like. This is a true story too. My wife watches her usual shows at night, and I don't know, Survivor this, Survivor that, Dancing to this, and usually I can't help but run my mouth. She said, I'm presenting you a challenge. I said, okay, write me a short story in 2 hours. So I did. This is it, it's called Killer Bees. Killer Bees because every word in it begins with the letter B. It's all herbs. You have to read it like 3 or 4 times and figure out what the story actually is. So, any more questions? Any other ones? Thank you for coming. Coffee, water. Thank you.
I was up there to see the Linden exhibit a couple of weeks ago. Tyler said that they condemned that house. And
Oh,
tore it down.
yeah. This house still remains from 1924. It's still there. And I was working with a group at the time that was looking to do a ghost hunt in that house. So I knock on the door in the back way about 100 yards, and someone comes out. I tell her who I am and whatnot. She said, you know, the back bedroom still has the fixtures from the door, and still has the oil stains from the fire. And I said, okay, that's nice. And a couple of weeks ago, anybody read the Batavian, Howard Owens? It's an online newspaper about Batavia, and he emailed me and said, Rob, they're tearing the house down. I said, getting more information. He said, the Linden house. He said, it has been condemned, and it's going to be destroyed. He told me about the items that were still there. I said, are you interested? I said, I would be, but I could never slide it past my wife. I couldn't hide them for, I couldn't say, let's put new door on. So we did talk to Tyler here today. So he's gonna try to reach out to the supervisor of Bethany and see if some of that stuff can be taken out before it's destroyed. It'll be here. Now, some of the items that I talked about, the front room, as soon as you come in the door off to the left, I can show you if you want, contains Francis Kimball's undergarment, the wires to the house that were cut from the phone, a snippet of loose hair, I said the pistol, and there's some other items up there. No? How bad did I do? Did I do that?
Interesting.
You might have heard that this is our last book here. Our business has been pushed by COVID. So we were happy to do this. There are a couple other books I wish I had done over the years. One is The Final Week in the Life of William McKinley. That always intrigued me, because the guy who assassinated him was tried, convicted, and executed within 7 weeks. And he always seemed to follow McKinley. So was there a real-life conspiracy at the time? That's what I would have done, is try to follow that. But we're in Attica. We're always around with these things, so any questions, just always give me a call. All right? Thanks, guys.